We are losing forests at a rate of almost 18 soccer fields per minute. I mean, think about that. That is an enormous amount of forests. So we have to do everything we can to halt and reverse that forest loss. But at the same time, we have to better manage the forests that we have. And that's what our Forest Forward program is about.
Welcome to Nature Breaking, a World Wildlife Fund podcast focused on the news and trends affecting our natural world and the people and species who call it home. I'm Seth Larson, and last month, alarming new data were released showing record-breaking tropical forest loss in 2024. Forests are critical to our planet and to us as humans, so we really need to double down on efforts to stop the loss of forests where possible and to more sustainably manage forests that are earmarked for production. That last part matters because 54% of the world's forests are managed either wholly or partly for the production of things like timber, pulp and paper, and furniture. That means that the companies that sell those products, as well as companies that source agricultural commodities like palm oil, soy, and beef, they have a big influence on whether forests get managed sustainably and continue to provide important ecosystem functions, or get plundered unsustainably at great cost to people and wildlife. That's where WWF's Forest Forward program comes in. This program was launched in 2021 to engage companies around the globe to reduce their impact on forests from the sourcing of commodities and to support nature-based solutions like forest restoration. WWF just released a new report chronicling the Forest Forward program's impact across its first 4 years, so I wanted to take this moment to dive a little deeper into what it looks like for a company to be a force for good in the world of forest conservation. Joining me for today's conversation is Linda Walker, WWF's Senior Director for Corporate Engagement on Forests. Linda will share some insights from the first 4 years of the Forest Forward program, as well as what she hopes it will achieve in the years to come. Thank you for listening, and now here's my conversation with Linda. Hey, Linda Walker, welcome to Nature Breaking. It's awesome to have you here today.
Thanks so much, Seth. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun conversation, and I want to start by just getting to know you a little better. You and I have worked together a little bit, but I want to hear you talk about what inspired your love for forests to begin with, and to get a little more specific, I'd love to ask you to share what your favorite forest-related memory is, either from your personal life or from your professional life.
Sure. Well, I grew up in southern New Jersey, not a place exactly known for its majestic old-growth forests.
The Pine Barrens, though,
yes,
were
very
a
near the
notable
Pine
thing.
Barrens.
Yeah.
Beautiful area. But we had 40 acres of woods behind the house I grew up in.
Wow.
That was majestic to me. I mean, imagine a 10-year-old girl just following her dad into those woods to find this 30-inch diameter tulip poplar tree. We would try to get our arms around it. I would look up into the sky. It felt like they have flowers, so it looked like the flowers and the branches were touching the sky. And my sister and cousin and I spent endless hours roaming around back there, just pretending we were in other worlds. And I think, before I even knew the words, I gained an appreciation of that forest and the forest's ability to provide, calm and rejuvenation. And that really inspired me to visit other forests, get a master's degree in forestry, and have a career in forest conservation.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. And in terms of my coolest forest memory,
Please.
That would have to be seeing my first orangutan in the wild. It was about 15 years ago on the Indonesian island of Borneo.
Yep.
We had a WWF forest team meeting where colleagues around the world were coming together to sort of, build on our strategy for working with companies the way we do. And we also had some of our forest corporate partners with us, and we were able to show them some really beautiful tropical forests and some really impacted areas that had been affected by deforestation. So after the meeting, a few of us booked a trip up a remote river. We're going up this river and look off to the left and catch a glimpse of a enormous kind of truck tire sized stick nest, which is a nest that orangutans build every night. They build a different nest to
know
sleep
that.
in. So we caught a glimpse of that and got really excited. And a few minutes later, we see this orangutan like swinging through the forest canopy, and a proboscis monkey as a bonus. So it was really exciting. It was one of the most magical moments of my life. And you really get a sense that those animals, those orangutans, are one of our closest living relatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you saw the tire-sized nest, did you sort of pause and just figure, okay, we're going to wait here and see if an orangutan comes
Yeah,
through?
we were going pretty slow. I mean, we were going upriver in a small motorboat, so we
Yeah.
were just sort of like staying at the same place. And yeah, it was really, really cool. And there's not that many orangutans left in the wild. They are really affected by deforestation in that part of the world, but seeing one was magical, and WWF is doing amazing work and other organizations to protect them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really inspired me, and I've been back a few times. So that's my special place.
So Linda, I want to dive more into the conservation work and some of the stuff that we're really here to talk about today.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start out by just asking you to parse out a statistic that I referenced in my intro to this episode. And this is something I came across when researching for this episode and going through the Forest Forward Impact Report. And the statistic said that 54% of the world's forests are managed either wholly or partly for production. And I wanted to ask you to just talk more about what that number means and how it shapes WWF's approach to forest conservation.
Sure. Well, that number is really why we have this Forest Forward program that I'll talk more about. So that number is critically important. Maybe before we go there, I just wanted to highlight a number that you mentioned in your introduction, which is the alarming rate of deforestation that has also, increased in the past year. I mean, we are losing forests at a rate of almost 18 soccer fields per minute. I mean, think about that. That is an enormous amount of forests. So we have to do everything we can to halt and reverse that forest loss. And WWF is working very, very hard on that. But at the same time, we have to better manage the forests that we have. And that's what our Forest Forward program is about. So, broadly speaking, forests around the world can be divided in a bunch of different categories. For example, there are protected forests, like legally protected forests, like in national parks.
Right.
They're really off limits from timber harvest. There are forests, fortunately, in very remote parts of the world still, in the tropics or in boreal areas. Those are critically important to protect. And there are a lot of forests around the world that just don't have any management on them. They're just kind of out there. But the 54% that you mentioned is the forest area that has some type of management plan on it, and that includes timber harvesting.
I was just so surprised that it was actually a majority of forests that are standing, because you think of a national park or a protected area, it's such a vast swath of forest that, in my mind, that just had to make up the majority of the world's forests between all of them. But
unfortunately, it doesn't, because a lot of those parks still are kind of a patch within a larger region that can include a lot of areas that have been deforested or converted to agricultural uses or other things. But the important thing to know is, when you think about these managed forests and timber harvest on them, that can range from very low intensity timber harvest, which is really what's happening on a lot of like family forest ownerships in the United States, and also community and indigenous managed forests also tend to have relatively lower timber harvest. They do harvest for timber, but also, those communities are dependent on those forests for their food and their medicines and their livelihood. So you can range from this sort of low intensity timber harvesting to very high intensity industrial forest and plantation forestry. And those forests, which we have in the U.S. and many other parts of the world, those are really the engine that drives the $1 trillion in global forest products trade every year. But the important thing for our audience to know is that all that 54% of managed forests around the world have a critical role to play in forest conservation and in our planet's health, because if those forests are well managed, they can provide critical habitat for wildlife. They can store enormous amounts of carbon. They can continue filtering our air and water, and continue to produce on a renewable basis all those forest products we use every day. But if they're not responsibly managed, if those forests are subject to illegal logging or repeated over-harvesting, they can get degraded. And they can become really vulnerable to things like insect pests and diseases and invasive species and forest fires and forest conversion ultimately. And that can happen if you over-harvest an area, it can lose the structural diversity that allow like different levels for animals to live in. It can lose the species diversity. And so those areas really they're not delivering the services that we need forests to provide. So the reason that Forest Forward and our work with companies exists in this area is we know if we can engage forest managers to better manage their forests and engage companies that source forest products or other products that can relate to forests, then we can help keep those forests healthy and deliver on our conservation goals and ultimately keep ourselves healthy.
Yeah. That's a great transition to talking about the Forest Forward program specifically. And I'd love to ask you to just talk about the history of the program. It's 4 years old now.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear you talk about what the impetus behind starting this program was and what it was designed to achieve.
Sure. Well, Forest Forward really builds on WWF's 30 years of working with forest managers and companies on responsible forestry. I'd say one original impetus was just the recognition that these managed forests are part of the mosaic of land uses that exist in our priority forest areas around the world. And so there was a real need for a more structured approach to engage with those forest managers to make the business case for improved forest management, to keep those places healthy for the species we're interested in protecting. So that was one impetus. Another impetus was really kind of going down the other end of the supply chain. And at that time, a few decades ago, big retailers like in the US and Europe were being increasingly asked by their ecologically minded consumers for better proof that the products on their store shelves were not contributing to tropical deforestation.
Yeah.
So back in 1994, WWF and a few other organizations founded a group called the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC. I actually brought one of their flyers to show you today.
Yeah.
So FSC developed the highest standards for forest management that protects environmental and social issues related to forestry. Things like protecting old growth forests, protecting rare species as you manage forests, wider stream buffers, protecting wetlands, reducing herbicide use, not cutting trees on steep slopes. Those are kind of all the more the environmental issues and requirements that were higher than the legal requirement for those forests. Similar robust requirements around social issues, workers' rights, safety, consideration of indigenous peoples that might live in the area. So for a long time, WWF was really focused on promoting the adoption of FSC with forest managers and companies that source forest products, because products that come from those forests can carry that FSC logo.
Right. And as you said, these are voluntary standards. They're not legally enforced. But for a company to be able to put that FSC logo on the product they're selling, they have to abide by all these standards.
They have to abide by that, get independently, certified by an independent third party, and then they can carry the FSC logo on their products.
Yeah.
So fast forward, though, to 2021, when we launched the Forest Forward program, we were really trying to build on that 30 years of work that we were doing with companies and kind of adapt the program in ways that we thought could have even more impact and engage even more companies. So we did 3 different things. The first thing we did is, building on FSC, we developed a broader set of tools and trainings, field tours, modules, supplier questionnaires, things that could sort of be even more resources that we could offer to forest managers and companies to help them with management and responsible sourcing. The second thing we did is decide to incorporate a broader set of commodities that can be affecting forests, like some of the agricultural commodities that come from deforestation, like palm oil or leather from beef, natural rubber. So we sort of broadened beyond forest products, wood and paper products, to some of those other commodities, and engaging the companies that source those, like apparel companies, restaurant companies, technology companies. That was the second way we sort of broadened and expanded. And the third thing that we did with Forest Forward is we added a new component of the program around nature-based solutions. So companies that we work with on the buyer side of forest products are required to make an additional investment beyond their responsible sourcing efforts in nature-based solutions, which can include funding restoration in priority landscapes, funding improved training for rangers on protected forests, supporting community forests or agroforestry projects. And we're implementing that third pillar of the program in coordination with our sister program called the Nature-Based Solutions Origination Platform. That was launched more recently. And that program really hones in on specific interventions in different landscapes that we think will be particularly of interest to some of our corporate partners who have an interest in quantifying the carbon, the nature, and the people benefits of the investments that they're supporting, so that can help them deliver against their sustainability goals, climate goals, nature goals that they might have. So we just try to find that sweet spot between our priority work and what we think the companies might be interested in supporting.
Yeah, it seems like such a great and natural but necessary evolution in the work that, as you said, we've been doing at WWF with companies for many years, but really kind of taking it to the next level and thinking more thoroughly about how we can drive a bigger impact, right?
Exactly. I mean, given the rates of forest loss and the urgency, we want to affect, as many sectors as we can, and really try to shift global markets on a wide range of sectors to be more sustainable and more resilient.
Yeah. And so what's the response been like from companies? As you're having conversations, I'm sure that you're sometimes having to convince companies to participate in this program. Yeah. What's the response been like, and what's the business case that you're making to these companies to help convince them to take part?
Yeah, well, companies like it. We're fortunate. We're fortunate. I mean, we have a great set of companies, but we always want more, of course. We want to influence more and go faster. We have 26 companies that range across 9 sectors all across the world. Wow. From the forest floor to the sales floor that we're working with. We have forest managers that own or manage forest concessions in places like the Congo Basin and the Amazon. And we have some of the world's largest global retailers, manufacturers, and end users of forest products as well. Some companies that might be familiar to listeners here in the U.S. include HP, Costco, Williams-Sonoma. We've got Pepsi, International Paper, Nike, Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, and Lowe's. That's just to name a few. So in terms of the business case, I think we try to engage companies on the business case for taking action, and also on the business case for working with WWF. So on the business case for action, we're fortunate in some ways that there's been a lot of studies and information out, in the media about the connection between companies and nature. The World Economic Forum a couple years ago put out a report that estimated that nearly half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature or nature services in some way. Yeah. That's $44 trillion a year. Amazing. So nature loss has direct implications for companies' bottom line, especially companies that depend on forests or forest products. Yeah. So that case is being made because companies can see some of the financial impacts of nature loss, of if they need to pause operations when there's been an extreme weather event, or if because of extreme weather, heat waves or droughts, that can really affect operations. So I think the case is being made for us in some ways because of the way climate change is affecting forests. But I'll also say that companies are recognizing more and more that that forests are one of our best solutions for climate change. Actions like improved forest management, forest protection, and restoration can deliver 30% of the climate mitigation that we need to keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees.
That's a big number.
It's 30%. A big number. It's a critical number. Of course, companies need to reduce their fossil fuel use. That's first and foremost. But forests and agricultural, a lot of grasslands and other actions you can take for nature can and must play a critical role in that solution. And just the other couple things that really help make the business case, there's an increased regulatory environment right now, especially in the EU.
Yeah.
There's a regulation called the EU Deforestation Regulation that's really forcing companies who sell into that market to prove that their products are deforestation free. So there's that sort of regulatory pressure that companies are facing, as well as increasing investor and consumer pressure in the U.S. So all those things are kind of helping make the business case. And then in terms of the business case for working with WWF, I think companies really appreciate WWF's global reach. We're in a lot of the same places that these companies are with their sourcing or operations. They appreciate our pragmatic, kind of science-based approach. We meet companies where they are. We're challenging them all the time to go further and faster, but we help companies really understand how forest risk can translate to business risk and how they can take action to mitigate it by engaging with suppliers, by implementing stronger sourcing policies, by investing in these nature-based solutions, and companies really appreciate the chance to have WWF kind of amplify the transparent reporting on progress that they might be doing as well.
Yeah. So it's been 4 years, right? 2021, we're in 2025 now. 4 years was a moment when you all decided to sort of take stock and put a report together about what the program has achieved so far.
Yep.
It's called the Forest Forward Impact Report, right?
That's right.
And we're recording it now, just a week or two before that report's coming out. But by the time people hear this episode, that report will be available. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little about what impacts that report chronicles and basically what has the program achieved over the last 4 years.
Yeah, well, we hope everybody reads the report.
Of course.
But we're really excited about it because it does really reflect an enormous amount of collaboration and engagement and impact. I guess the top line statistic is that between the forests that are managed by partners in our program and the landscape or forest investments that are being made by companies in the program, that's totaling almost 4 million hectares of forest area around the world that's been impacted by those actions by our companies. And just to break that down, about 2.7 million hectares of those forests are managed by companies that are forest managers, and about 1.3 million are represented by the things like restoration that our sort of downstream buyers are funding. But in addition to that number, which is significant, the volume of wood that is purchased by these companies I mentioned and others who are sourcing responsibly from forests is translating into better management of those forests.
Just to go back to that 4 million hectares number, can you put that in perspective in relation to like the size of a state or something that people might be able to relate to?
Yeah, well, I know we talk acres more than hectares in the U.S., so a hectare is about 2.2 acres. And I think that 4 million hectares is about a couple New Jerseys.
A couple New Jerseys.
From where I grew up. So it's a significant area, and our aspiration and what we're seeing already is a lot of those investments are allowing us to attract other public sector and foundation or other private sector finance to those same places. So some of these investments are kind of like anchor investments that allow us to bring, to leverage those and bring more money in as well.
Great.
Yeah.
And so I know the report also really dives into some specific case studies and examples of companies that have engaged and made a difference in certain ways. I'd love for you to share some of those concrete examples to give people a picture in their minds of how this program really works and engages with companies and what those projects look like on the ground.
One example I can share is our partnership with HP.
Mm-hmm.
We, going back to, as I said, sort of pre-2021, when we launched Forest Forward, we had been working with HP for more than a decade to help them develop an industry-leading responsible sourcing policy for HP branded papers and paper-based packaging. And HP did a great job with implementing that policy, engaging with suppliers and avoiding deforestation. And then in 2020, we agreed to dramatically expand that partnership to really focus on these nature-based solutions. So now, with the support of HP, WWF and partners have been able to affect more than 500,000 acres, that's an acres number, across the world, including in China, Peru, Brazil, and Australia. So, for example, in the upper reaches of the Amazon, in an area called Madre de Dios, Peru, we are working with forest management concessions. We're also working with some agroforestry cooperatives that produce Brazil nuts to help them.
Agroforestry cooperatives.
Yeah, these cooperatives of different communities that come together and kind of pool their resources to manage forests, but also some agricultural products within it. That's kind of agroforestry is where you're kind of interplanting agricultural products within a forest system, which can really be a positive thing for community livelihoods and income while you still have a larger forest area. So that work is happening. We're also working to train women in the forestry profession who have an interest in it. It's more of a male-dominated field, obviously, even in that part of the world. But there's some real interest in the communities in getting women more trained up in some of those skills. So we're doing that. Also in Brazil. If you go over to the eastern side of Brazil, we're working with HP funding in the Atlantic forest area. Now, the Atlantic forest is not as well known as the Amazon, but it is an equally biodiverse and endangered tropical forest in that part of the world. Only 12% of it is left, but it's critically important for species like the jaguar. And so with HP's support, we've been able to implement restoration in a lot of areas that are reconnecting fragmented jaguar habitat, working with some indigenous communities to be able to access their traditional lands more in areas that had been designated as parkland. And again, working with local communities to just sort of improve some of their livelihood and some of the agroforestry projects that they're implementing too. And last but not least, we are implementing restoration in areas in eastern Australia that were hit by wildfires to the benefit of koalas. So HP is also helping us in that area.
Oh, that's great.
So that's kind of an example on more of the buyer side companies that we work with. On the forest management side, there's a company called Interholco that manages a large forest concession in the Congo Basin. Now, that is a difficult part of the world to operate in for a variety of reasons. But Interholco is implementing its FSC certification and reduced impact logging and all the other principles of FSC such that the forest is managed with elephants and gorillas and chimpanzees still living and roaming free and healthy in that forest. So that's an example of it can be well managed and still, really provide a lot of those benefits. But there's obviously a lot of local communities that live around those forests too. So we're working together with Interholco to find more ways to bring more revenue to those communities that are living around that area, to even employ some of the community members for poaching patrols and things like that to protect the forest. So really looking for ways to keep reinforcing the value of keeping those forests standing and well managed and bringing real economic value to the communities that surround it.
That sounds like such a great example that I hope other forest management companies learn from. And I'm just trying to think about the reasons a company might be resistant to engaging in those practices. And my guess is it's a different way of approaching that business, and it might take a little bit of work on the front end to adjust practices and make sure that you're taking into account different things. It reminds me of something that our colleague Pete Pearson said on an episode a few weeks ago when I interviewed him about our food waste work, and he was talking about working with hotels and some other companies to avoid food waste in their food supply services. And I think he talked about how doing anything is going to be a little bit of work on the front end. But once we see companies do that work, they tend not to backslide because they don't want to lose the progress and they actually see the benefits that come from it. And I'm wondering if you sort of expect or have already seen the same sort of response from Interholco or the other companies that are implementing those more positive approaches.
Yeah, absolutely, Seth. I mean, I think they see the value of the community collaboration and trust and the benefits that have come to the community, that sort of social license to operate that's been critical for them to operate in that really difficult part of the world. They also are motivated to keep up those practices because the buyers of the wood that they're harvesting when they do harvest in that forest are very, discriminating buyers. Their market is for higher end, sustainably sourced tropical woods. But if you don't have that market demand, then you don't have as much motivation to keep, that can really erode the motivation to keep implementing those practices for the downstream. But that's what we're trying so hard, is to keep that market demand up so you can keep the pressure on and the incentives on, both on the upstream and downstream side.
Yeah. Forest Forward is just one initiative in a constellation of forest conservation programs, initiatives around the world. From NGOs, from governments, and those are all happening against a backdrop of really profound global loss of forests, like we talked about earlier in this episode. And in that context, I just wanted to ask if you feel hopeful that between all these different initiatives coming together, if there is a future where that trend of forest loss gets reversed and we can kind of see that stop. Yeah.
Well, as you said at the beginning and we've said throughout, I mean, forests are at risk. We're in a dire situation now. But so it's sort of an all hands on deck approach. But I am hopeful because, as you said, we need governments, we need companies, we need communities, we need civil society, everybody coming together. And so there are a couple things that give me hope in that vein. One is there is an increasingly large pool of money that's being committed by governments and companies toward investing in these nature-based solutions for climate mitigation. One latest study I saw said $200 billion has been committed, mostly by governments, but also by companies, that can be utilized to essentially reward particularly tropical forest countries for keeping forests standing in those countries. One example of that is called the Tropical Forest Finance Facility, the TFFF, that's being sort of built out in the lead up to this year's climate COP. And that would be, countries, more developed countries, pooling money and offering money to lesser developed countries that have these huge tropical forest areas to basically reward them to keep their forests as forests. You have to make forests more valuable standing than cutting them down for something else. So we need more like $500 billion committed by 2030, but that's still a pretty impressive number, and it's going up. So I feel some optimism about that because there is more and more momentum. The upcoming COP is being called the Forest COP,
COP.
So
it's
we're hopeful.
It's being held in Brazil.
Yeah. So really hopeful that momentum will continue because of the recognition of the financial costs associated with forest loss that will affect us all. The other thing that gives me hope is I think there's just more and more recognition of the interconnectedness of our human health with forest health and planetary health.
Yeah.
There have been more and more studies that show the mental health benefits and physical health benefits of spending time in forests, and more studies, including some that WWF has been involved with, showing the connection between deforestation and the spread of infectious disease in tropical regions. So, the more we can show the connection between our human health and planetary health and forest health, I think that will create innovation and motivation to keep forests standing. So I'm hopeful on that front as well.
Yeah. Linda, I just have one last question for you today before I let you go. And just thinking about people who might be listening to this show at home, on their commutes, watching on YouTube, What can they do to support forest conservation in their own lives and ensure that companies continue to prioritize the health of forests?
Yeah, act. I think everybody's familiar with the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, which I think we learned even when we were little at home. But that's a really important one. At home, try to use forest resources efficiently. Use recycled paper where you can. Reclaim furniture, things like that. And when you do need to go out and buy a forest product, look for that FSC logo. Look for that checkmark tree symbol, because that is your assurance that you're supporting responsible forestry when you're buying that product. I think listeners could ideally take time to understand a little bit more what's behind that logo. It's not just kind of a few things done better. There's people behind it. There is real differences in on the ground that translate to better livelihoods and better habitat and things like that. So, if you go to a store, ask people, like, do you have a responsible sourcing policy? Do you have any FSC certified products? You do things like that. At school or work, you can ask your employer or school, do you guys have a responsible sourcing policy? How do you decide what paper and supplies you buy for the school or for our offices or our furniture? Everybody can be kind of part of asking the questions that can maybe have a light bulb go off because they might not have been answered before. And then last but not least, I would just say, in your community, just get out and enjoy forests, where there's so many opportunities to plant trees, to be out in nature with your family. And I think the more people do that, to join organizations that focus on forests locally and nationally, to advocate for policies that help forests, because there's a lot of them out there that ways that we can help forests with policy and regulation too. So I think all those different pieces are ways that people can help, but doing any action is critically important. And I guess I'd just lastly say that people have a lot of power with their purses. Their purchasing power is really significant, and everybody can make a difference in every part of their lives. We're all busy and we all can't spend all the time going deep in some of these things, but even one simple action can make a big difference for forests. So I'm really grateful for all the supporters that we have and the opportunity to really enjoy all the benefits that forests provide.
Yeah. Well, I think we can leave it there for today. Linda, thank you so much for breaking this all down for us today. I really enjoyed having you on the podcast, and have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me, Seth. I really appreciate it. You too.
Thanks again to Linda for joining the show today. As she said a minute ago, forests are incredibly important, not just for planetary health, but for human health. And they also provide some of the most essential products that we all use in our everyday lives. But if the forests that provide those products aren't managed sustainably, it's going to continue driving forest loss with all the knock-on effects that come with that for people and wildlife. Companies have a big role to play in achieving better outcomes for forests, and I encourage everyone to read the new Forest Forward Impact Report to learn more. It's filled with examples of great on-the-ground work that Forest Forward partner companies are supporting in the US and Canada, as well as in the tropics. The link to the report is in the show notes for this episode. You can also learn more at forestforward.panda.org. For now, thank you for listening, and let's keep building a more sustainable future.